Hi everybody, Angela Fair here, and I wasn't planning to make a video today. My studio is a disaster area, and I'm in the middle of getting ready for an art exhibition, which is why I've got my framing stuff out. And because my framing stuff was out, my mat cutter, I thought it would be a good time to do a little bit of a mat cutting tutorial. And I'm not an expert by any means. I took a course on mat cutting several years ago, and over the years I've improved my materials so that I have better equipment, and good equipment helps a lot when you're working with mat board and framing. So just a few supplies you're going to want to have on hand: pencil and ruler, a bone folder. I'm going to have to find mine because I don't see it in front of me. And then I have my mat cutter, which we'll get a closer look at in a few minutes. The mat cutter I'm using is a Logan model 450, and depending on what type of mat cutter you have, your process might be a little bit different. So keep that in mind. But we're going to get started here in just a moment, and I'll demonstrate the different steps as I go through. Mat cutting, I've found measure twice, cut once is a good rule of thumb to follow. And having great supplies makes a big difference. I had just a hobby size mat cutter previously, and I found my cuts weren't as straight. I made more mistakes than I do now that I have this this Artist Elite cutter. And so upgrading, if you know you're going to be doing a lot of framing, you can save a lot of money by cutting your own mats. I get my frames still from my local frame shop. She cuts my chop frames and provides glass, and then I do the rest, the backing and the mat cutting. So we're going to get started, and I'll just kind of narrate as I go along. The first thing I think you want to do is make sure you've measured your painting, and I always allow an overlap. So this painting, I've measured it, the outer edges. You want to measure all the corners, just in case you didn't cut it straight. So it's about 10 3/4 here, 10 3/4 on that edge, good, and 15 and 15. So we've got 10 3/4 by 15, but I don't want to cut my mat to that size. I want to move in a little bit so that I make sure that some of my painting is under the mat, the frame of the mat. So what I actually did when I went to the frame shop was we measured it together, and then we planned for a 3-inch mat, and depending on the size of your painting, I like to go between 2.5 inches and 3 inches of mat board. And so that brought it out 3 inches on both sides. So then you want to add 6 inches to what you've measured here. And we decided to go with 10 by 14.5. So we moved in 3/8 of an inch on both sides, and a 1/4 inch on the top and bottom, just kind of to give us that leeway. And so we have overall an outer size of 16 by 20.5. And so my framer, actually, when she measures, she'll actually start at 6 if we want a 3-inch mat. So she'll add that 6 right away, and then she'll measure here and say, okay, we want 16.5 inches. And that's actually a pretty good way to do it. And so I've already marked 16 inches here and 20.5 inches here. And so we can go right over to the mat cutter to cut it. I don't have to use this straight cutter or my mat cutter. I could just use my straight edge, my ruler, and a utility knife to cut along those lines, making sure, of course, I have some kind of cutting board underneath me. But the mat cutter does make things much easier. So we're just going to bring it over and get it set up for mat cutting, for straight cutting rather. You want to make sure your work surface is clean. You don't want to dirty your mat board by accidentally having some dirty stuff on it. So just make sure you've given it a good wipe. The mat cutter comes with this slip sheet, and mine's almost ready for a new one. It's almost cut right through here. And that's what we use when we're cutting the mat, the beveled edge. We don't need it right now. The other thing we don't need right now is this set scale. This is a tool here that we use to to help us guide the width of the mat, but we don't need that right now either. So, but we do need this little ruler attachment, which just sets in here and sticks right out on the side, and that's going to help us have a right angle when we go to do our cut. So I can take my cut. The first cut I'm going to do is going to be 16 inches. So I'm going to pull my little guide here right to 16 and then lock it in place. And then my mat board comes up. And I just got to find that 16, which is right here. On a smaller piece of mat board, if I'm cutting a smaller piece, I don't trust this edge right here. But with a big piece like this, I know I can press it right up straight against this edge and right up against this guideline that I've marked here for 16 inches. And I'm gonna get a nice straight cut at 16. I have measured, so I have pencil marks showing me just to just to make me feel doubly sure that I have the right measurement measured and I have everything in the right place. This straight edge, I like to change my blades almost every time I cut my mats because you're going to get a better cut. And so we're going to cut our mat right now. I'm left-handed, so I'm going to do this in a little bit reverse to what you're used to seeing. I have to push when other people pull, and it's just one of those hazards of being left-handed. And the mat cutter has little bumper pads to keep it from shifting. So I can now just go right up to my edge here. And I hold down the guide with my hand, and my other hand holds the handle, and I just push right to the end and get a beautiful cut. Next cut is going to be 20.5 inches. And my guide here only goes to 20, so that means I'm going to use the marks that I made with my pencil and go the other direction. And I think the best way is, again, to double check that measurement. And I think that should do it right there. And I'm just going to double check by just, I'm going to bring my blade right over and just give it a little press and see where the mark goes. And I think that should be good. Again, making sure it's square against here is going to give you a nice straight cut. And then back to the end of the table to push it right on down. And the straighter this is cut, the nicer my mat's going to look when I cut it. So here is the full dimension of my mat board. The mat I have is cream on one side and white on the other to give me two colors to work with. I'm working with the white, so that means I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to mark my 3-inch by 3-inch mat now. And I find with marking a 3-inch mat, you want to go in about 3 inches and mark it. And accurate marking is going to help a lot too. Keep your everything looking good. Once I've marked those 3 inches, I just draw a line from one to the other. Some people just draw a partial line on the corners. I like to go straight across because sometimes if you don't draw it far enough, you're regretting it later when you're trying to see where to stop. And then mark 3 inches on this side. I've also found that when I have a lot of mats to do, if I'm trying to frame for a show and I've got maybe half a dozen paintings that need to be framed, I try not to do all of them at once. I've learned that I have a tendency, you get tired, you get distracted, and so mats that go really well at the beginning, all of a sudden you'll start making mistakes as soon as you start to get tired. So I like to do no more than 3 paintings at a time, just so that I keep my measurements accurate and don't waste anything. Okay, so for cutting this beveled edge, and we do have a nice frame drawn on our mat, on the back side of our mat board. So now I'm going to set up my mat cutter for cutting that beveled edge. And so the set scale, that's where that comes into place. And usually I put this on backwards the first time. Let's see if I can get it right this time. There we go. And I'm going to shift it right up to 3 inches. And I've written a little note for myself, cut 1/8 inch over. So I like to actually cut 3 1/8 inches. And the reason I do this is because my old mat cutter used to automatically allow that extra 1/8 of an inch. Again, that little bit of overlap, just so that you don't cut your mat too large, because if your mat is too big, that edge of your paper is gonna show, and that looks terrible. So having that little 1/8 inch grace or 1/16 of an inch, just a little bit, in addition to having measured a little bit small, should allow for any mistakes to be avoided. The other thing you want to do, once that set scale is locked in place, is put the slip sheet down. And the point of the slip sheet is we don't need this, we are cutting right to the bottom of the mat, but no deeper. And so we want to have the slip sheet down to avoid cutting into the board of our mat cutter. And I have frequently forgot it, and that's no fun at all. So I'm going to lay that down, and then I'm going to place my mat, and that guide needs to be out of the way now. And I'm just going to place my mat in place and get my bevel mat cutter, which is a different device, and it's got the little blade on it as well. And again, a fresh blade will give you a better cut, nice clean cut, so that you don't have a rough edge. And that goes right in place over here. And there's a little black mark right on the edge here. And this black mark shows you where to put the blade down. We are not starting on the outer edge of the mat. We move the mat cutter, we lock it into the rail. There's a little lip there that the mat cutter sits in. And we slide right up to our penciled line. And that's why we wanted to draw that pencil line right across, so that now I can see it and I can line it up to my bevel. And I don't cut past that line. And that is really far away, so I'm going to slide everything down. I don't need to square anything because it's just, it's just flush against the set scale this time. And then slide my mat cutter, line up those lines, and then to make the blade go down, it's just depressing on that angled piece. And again, left-handed, feeling a little backwards. And I just smoothly cut right to the next pencil line. Then I lift and turn, and you should be seeing that you've cut right through. I didn't mention that you can measure and make sure, like just set your blade up against the piece of mat board and then just tilt it down and just check and see how deep it goes and how much it cuts into the slip sheet. And then you can adjust it to lift the blade if it's cutting too deep, or adjust it to lower it if it's cutting too shallow. And once again, lining up to the pencil mark and pressing down, making sure I'm flush against the set scale, and then sliding right to the pencil line and then lifting. And just rotate to the next position. Pencil mark, pressure, slide. And I'm always very careful as I turn. Sometimes the corners don't quite cut, and so sometimes you have to go in with a little X-Acto knife after and just sever a little thread of paper that's holding everything in place. So I don't just jerk the mat around and I don't want those pieces to rip if they are attached anywhere. Okay, so I've gone right to my edge every time. Now I can lift and everything cut cleanly. I have a beautiful beveled edge. And now I can take a look at my painting and make sure it fits. Just checking again with a nice little overlap. And it's upside down as usual. And there she is. And now I'll cut a backing piece to go behind, and that's just again with the straight cutter. I'll take everything apart and cut the backing. Ordinarily I would cut all the backings and mats at once, but I wanted to show you guys just how simple it is to use a mat cutter. It's not a complicated thing. The one last thing that I haven't done, and I'll demonstrate to you now, is just grabbing my bone folder. It's a little piece of bone, I guess, or bone-like substance. And this is what we use to just go around and make sure our paper is nice and smooth, that there's no ragged edges. And those areas where those two cuts intersected, you can use the bone folder to flatten any bits of any line there that shows that intersection. It just smooths everything out. And that's all there is to that. It just gives your cut a little bit of a smoother look. And that's all. Okay, so I've cut my mat and I've assembled my framing materials, and so I'm ready to put this all together. And I actually had to stop and re-sign my painting because I realized I'd actually signed it upside down. This painting is kind of almost an abstracted view of a little spring brook. And so somehow I had a little brain fart when I went to sign it and wrote my signature upside down. And then I kept wondering why I kept turning it upside down. So that explains it. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I want to center it behind my mat. And what I like to do is just kind of take a look and see how much excess space I have. My paper is a little bit rippled, little buckled, because of painting in watercolor. Often that happens when you're working with a lot of water. If it's really buckled, most of the time a little buckling will be flattened by the pressure of the mat and the glass and the backing. But if it's really considerably buckled, you can iron it. I put it down between two pieces of paper towel face down on my ironing board and just iron on a light steam setting. And so that's one way I kind of avoid or get that flattened so I can frame it. But I think it's just this one corner, and I think it'll be okay once I get it in the frame. And that looks about where I think I want to position it. I'm glad that I framed it or cut my mat just a little bit smaller than I was originally measuring, because I don't have a lot of extra space, just enough. And then I'm going to just flip it over. I don't want it to shift. And then I have this framer's tape. You want to use an acid-free tape. And there's different ways you can mount it. You can tape it, and you don't want to tape it all the way around because paper does breathe and expand as the climate changes. So ordinarily what I do is I put a thin strip at the top, and that is all. And I don't press it too firmly at this point because I'm going to flip it over and check and make sure it's still in the right place. But I don't have any bits of cut edge of paper showing. And I think that still looks good to me. So then flip it back again. And this is where the bone folder comes in handy again. I just want to apply enough pressure so that I know that my adhesive is going to stick for a long time. And whenever I'm framing my watercolor paintings, I always use acid-free and conservation quality materials. That's my backing board is just as important as using an acid-free mat board, and your tape as well. All of those things will keep acids from leaching into your painting and discoloring it. Okay, so here I have my mat. Everything's adhered, and then I'm ready to put it in the frame. Today I'm using a metal chalk frame. And it comes in 4 pieces, 4 noisy pieces. And then I need my corners. You're going to need 4 of these corners with screws in. And then they have little plates that go along with them. They're little flat pieces, same shape, they just don't have the screws, so you need 4 of those as well. And then I'm going to pull out my hangers at the same time, set those over there. And it seems like, how would you put all 4 pieces together and the glass and have everything fit together with just these corners? And it's not actually as hard as it seems. What I like to do is take my 2 long pieces and 1 short piece. And that 1 short piece I'll start by just taking the 2 corner pieces And the side without the screw, the flathead screw, is the part that faces up against this little metal plate, this little buffer thing, and those just slot in right here, and then over to, meeting at this corner. And you want to adjust it until you get it really, you want to adjust it till you get a really nice clean edge where those two edges butt together. And so I'll grab my screwdriver, and I don't screw it really tight at this point because there's still going to be adjustments made once all four pieces come together. And bear with me, I am not very tool handy. And then that's one corner assembled. And then the second one, same thing. Those two plates facing together. Slide them in. And slot them together with the long piece. So you have a long one on both sides. And that gives you a U shape. And when you get to this stage where you've got three pieces assembled, just like so, this is the time when you want to put your glass and mat board in. And I have a piece of glass that I've cleaned one side of it. So my glass has come from the framer as well, and you can choose, I usually just use regular glass. I don't order the UV glass or the non-glare. I find the non-glare it kind of makes your picture look cloudy. You don't want that, and the UV glass is very expensive. I really just try to hang my paintings out of direct sunlight. And I've made a little sandwich with my mat board, my painting, and my glass. And I'm just going to turn this so it's easier to do. And now all I'm going to do is just slide that sandwich into my frame, my U-shaped frame here. And it's a little awkward to do and still keep it on camera. There we go. So that's been slid onto the frame. And once that's done, you've got those three pieces. Then we put our third part of our U in. So I take now my leftover corner pieces, the last two corners, and these go at the same time into the ends of the last frame piece. Just like so. And then that just slides right in here. And lift your glass, make sure it's in behind the frame. And now is the time when we want to tighten and make sure everything fits. All those corners meet really nicely and cleanly. And I just like to adjust my screws, loosen and tighten until I get all the corners just the way I like them. Make sure there's no little fuzzies caught in those joints. These frames are really easy to open and change up the painting if you decide you want to put a different painting in, if you need a certain frame size. And so I like to keep several of my standard sizes on hand and just swap the frame out from time to time. Yeah, this one needs to be adjusted just a little bit. There's a bit of a gap there that I don't like. And just, I think that's about as close as it will go. And this one needs to be adjusted as well. Oops. Okay, so now I take a quick look at everything and see how it looks all together. Everything is very loose in my painting right now. And in my sandwich that I placed in. So now is the time when we want to tighten it all up, but I can see there's no big fuzzy bits between the glass and the mat. That's the main thing, is I don't want to have any dirt or hair or debris of any kind there. Then I have these springs, and I've seen these springs installed in lots of different ways. There's not really any, as far as I know, there's not really any right or wrong way to do it. I like to just press it down, slide it right into place along the edge of the picture. The bigger your picture, the more springs you're going to use, and all this does is it just flattens and holds everything securely inside of the frame. And this is quite a deep frame, so I'm going to use quite a few springs. I have tons of them because they always provide me with more than I use. So now is the time to go nuts and use lots when you have a big deep frame like this. And that holds everything nice and securely, and it's easy to take them out should you need to open up your frame. I think I'm going to do one more in that corner. And now when I flip it over, look at that. My little curved edge that was over here is nice and flat up against the mat. The reason we have mats in watercolor is to provide a barrier so that our painting isn't touching the glass. If our painting is touching the glass, there's a place for condensation to build up, for things to stick, and a painting can really get ruined that way. We don't want that to happen, so we put the mat in. It provides that little bit of breathing space in between the glass and the painting. And over the years, we've developed, multiple ways to make our mats beautiful, just with double mats and beveled edges and fancy cuts and so forth. But as a watercolorist, with my stuff in galleries, I generally just go for this clean and simple white mat, and it looks good with everything. Last thing we need to do, second last thing, is put our mounting hardware on, and this is for the wires, and they just slip in like this. And make sure that my painting's not upside down. And then I just like to measure and make sure they're even on both sides. I'm going to put them at 6 inches from the top, and of course that's going to depend on the size of my painting. I just kind of decide to do it about 1/3 of the way down. And make them the same on both sides. Okay, I have some hanging wire I'm just going to use here. I just thread it through. Usually go a couple of inches past. Right about, maybe about 4 inches longer than I need. Fold it there. Use a multi-purpose scissor to cut it. And then that just gets wrapped around here. And I probably cut a little more than I need. I can trim off. But I don't want my painting to fall off the wall because the wire came loose, so I always err on the safe side. And I like to keep a fairly good tension so it goes up just a little bit. And I'll wrap that one around. And the last thing I do before I call it finished, the most important part, is just to stick my contact information on the back. Should this painting sell at the gallery, I want to make sure they know who made it. It's all written on the front, but here's ways to contact me, to visit my website, and so forth. So that's really my process for framing and matting using these metal chop frames. It's really not a complicated process. It's just a matter of being really careful with your measurements and having a nice clean and large workspace to work in, and you'll end up with a beautiful framed and matted painting. And I encourage you to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more on watercolor demonstrations and tutorials, or visit my website learn.angelafair.com to take an online watercolor course. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.